let's get going. I want to introduce our panelists. First up, we have Virginia Damron. She's an Associate Director of Career Education at VCU here in Richmond. She's got 15 years of experience in higher education and a unique perspective on what it takes to get noticed and get hired. And she's excited to share her experience and expertise in interviewing and putting your best foot forward as you're looking to expand your career. She's also a Richmond and Virginia. I don't know if you're a native Virginia, but I saw you went to William & Mary and JMU, and now you're at VCU. So you've been here longer than I have for sure. But welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks, Andrew. I appreciate it. I'm actually a Navy brat, but I call Virginia my home. I was raised in California, San Diego, California for a little bit of time, but I've lived in the Commonwealth of Virginia, as I say it, for the past 30 years. So I'm a little bit older than I look, but yes, I'm a big proponent of Virginia schools, and my whole family went to Virginia schools. So I'm really excited to be sharing my experience, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Of course, yeah, thanks for joining us. Next, we have Eric Stafford. Eric is a talent acquisition lead, also at Workshop Digital. He's our head recruiter, and he's a huge part of helping us grow as an agency. So his role and his contributions are in helping recruit both college grads and experienced digital marketers to Workshop Digital so we can fulfill our purpose of building a better agency. And little known facts, prior to joining Workshop, Eric was a recruiter at Amazon and has an awesome story about literally walking into Jeff Bezos's office and telling him that the recruiting model was broken. And he's still alive to talk about it. So conversation went well, obviously. So now he's on the Workshop team helping us build a better agency, and really excited to have him here. So thanks, Eric, for joining us.
Thanks, Andrew. Excited to be here.
And we have Anna, last but not least, Anna Reed from CarMax. She oversees college recruiting at CarMax, a fantastic company based here in Richmond. I'd encourage you to get to know CarMax, not only as a customer, obviously, but as a potential employer. It's an amazing company. I'm biased because I used to work there, so I can attest to the fact and vouch for the fact that it's a great company with a great culture and career opportunities. Prior to CarMax, Anna was at Capital One in a college recruiting role, HR generalist and specialist roles. So she's got a strong, deep background in HR and all things recruiting as well. So we're lucky to have Anna here. So Anna, thank you for joining us.
No, excited to be here with you guys tonight. Looking forward to it.
Well, I want to get this conversation started. This is meant to be a dialogue. I might have some questions teed up, but let's let the conversation go where it wants to go. And I think that, I'll start with kind of the most common questions that we get. And when we were putting together this program, the questions we heard from professors and students alike, the first thing they want to know is, what is it they can be doing now, or for the students in the audience, what can they be doing now in school, either in terms of coursework or classes or certifications or educational opportunities that you might have at school? Where do you see the candidates with the best opportunities or the most knowledge coming from in terms of the coursework they take on, the training they gather outside of classes? And what kind of mix are you looking for from a recruiting standpoint for undergrads? And I'll start with you, Anna. Love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think there are a few things, like, obviously as a recruiter, a lot of the times the first thing you see from a candidate is the resume, right? So the first thing you're looking at is, where does the student go to school? What is their GPA? And potentially, what, of course, is their major as well. But they're also looking down your resume. So they're trying to see, are you involved in, any clubs or organizations? Is there anything you're doing externally that stands out that is kind of growing your passion in the field, right? A lot of times our interviewers, what they love about candidates is when the candidates are talking about what they're doing off the side of their desk. So what are they doing, outside of the classroom that has got them excited to keep them in this field and keeps them driven towards a particular major in this area within the industries as well. So it's a lot of really having your talking points kind of together around why you're doing what you're doing, why you're looking at the roles you're looking for, but also specifically, what is that passion that you have around that? And we probably overuse the word passion in the recruiting field, but especially in the technical space and technology these days, you know, it's not enough just to be getting your degree. You've got to be showing that you're going that extra step to be furthering yourself even more. And it also shows, I think, that you're self-driven and you're self-motivated as well. So I think that's an important part of it too. You can't always tell that from a resume, but if your resume is getting you in the door, being able to sell yourself and talk about those passion projects or that extra work or why you're doing what you're doing is always really important to make sure you've got that story kind of buttoned up when you're talking to different companies as well.
Yeah, I want to dig into that story in a moment and kind of lead into how we can help prepare students to tell better stories and memorable stories in the interview process. And we'll circle back to that. Eric, what are your thoughts? Are you looking for anything in particular on resumes or an experience or backgrounds that really help a candidate stand out?
Yeah, I mean, I think Anna summed it up pretty well of having that extracurricular activity. Those things that you're doing outside of the classroom are really important. We have this great tool in front of us called the internet where you can learn pretty much everything nowadays. And so I think expanding your skill set and taking the free certifications that are online, those little things are really helpful and really beneficial to you, because you can go into an interview saying, hey, I've done this training or I've done this coursework outside of school, and I'm developing my skills outside of the school environment, is really important. On the topic of resumes, I'll say recruiters, we look at hundreds of resumes a day sometimes. And so looking for things that pop off of resume using, really strong descriptive words, and making sure that it's grammatically correct, making sure that your spelling is correct. I am a king of spell check. I am not a great speller and I miss stuff up all the time. So I run all of my stuff through multiple different spell checks. And making sure that that's accurate and up to date. So having those on there is really important. And then, highlight your volunteer experience. There are so many great, in the Richmond area, but across the country where there are volunteer opportunities with nonprofits. I think that's a great way to get exposure into your field. Find a nonprofit that, needs someone to manage their social media accounts, or run a post up a day. And that's really can be a strong benefit for you to add. So add some nonprofit and volunteering work to your resume can really help boost it, and it'll make your recruiters happy. They'll see that you're doing stuff outside of the classroom.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And Virginia, from the insider's perspective, in an advisory function for students, what are you seeing? What are you typically recommending, and how do you approach those conversations?
I'm really glad that Anna and Eric just mentioned resumes, because I did workshops on them pretty much all week for presentations from freshmen to seniors. And I think the most important thing that students and people just don't understand is the power of the resume. And you mentioned a story. And so I always tell my students that you are two-dimensional and you are a flat piece of paper, but what you write on it is what makes you come alive. And so I don't think that students or even professionals give themselves enough credit for what they're capable of doing. So I did an exercise with my freshmen yesterday where I showed them an okay resume and a great resume, and it was completely different. And so I tell them with the 7 to 15 seconds, if that the recruiter looks at your resume, you need to do everything that you can. It doesn't mean you have to do anything fancy. I think that's what's really worrisome about for some students, but there's so much on the internet where you can do research. You can look at the American Marketing Association. They have a student, a student membership that's a lot less expensive. I was just on here. They have all kinds of articles that you can read about. There's so many things that you can do, not just with your resume, but I did want to mention about the hands-on experience. I don't think that people realize that their classroom experience is actual experience. So if you did a year-long or a semester-long project with a group of people in your class, if it's a marketing class or something like that, I don't think people realize they can put it down as a heading like academic projects, or and they can actually go through and talk about the simulation that they ran through with the recruiter and just paint it out about, like, managed group project with this many people, or what they conceptualized, because I don't think that they realize that the grade that they receive can be something that you actually can put on your resume. So I would encourage people to go and talk with their career centers at their various universities. And other universities will also talk with alumni as well. So you just need to check into that, because I do side gigs and I charge people a lot of money. And so if you have or are a student, like going to the career center and just really helping, letting those career coaches, Anna talked about their passion. I'm very passionate about helping people with that. And I think, as we're moving into interviews, the resume only gets you so far. And so I hear students all the time tell me, well, if I just get the interview, I know I can get the job. And then they tank because they freeze up and they're just not prepared. And guess what? Experienced recruiters know it. They know every thing that you've done before because they've seen it all. So I think most of it is just about not only being prepared, but also doing as much research as you can and being willing to go a little bit extra. It doesn't mean you have to do 5 internships. I'm very aware of that people do have to work and they have families and stuff like that, but there are still things that you can do on the side to just help yourself.
Yeah, the one piece of advice I wish I had taken my former self was actually going and seeking that help from the Career Center and the experts. I didn't do that. And yes, you can do it without that expert help, but man, that would have saved me a lot of stress and trouble. And so I would agree 100%. There are people out there trained and willing and able to help. What about the non-marketing students? This is something I face all the time too, right? I don't want the stigma to be that if you don't have a degree in marketing or coursework in digital marketing, that this career path, digital marketing in particular, is not approachable or accessible, because we see it all the time. Some of our best marketers don't have even a 4-year degree at all, much less a degree in marketing. So what about it from a recruiting standpoint helps a candidate stand out if they don't have the pedigree, for lack of better words, with a marketing degree from one of our fine Virginia institutions? But what else could you do to help build your maybe your hands-on experience or that vibe, that story that you're looking for? And I'll start. Maybe I'll go to Eric with that. If you have a couple examples or ideas.
Yeah, for sure. I think you're right, Andrew. We have a couple people with us that I think someone has a music degree, and they're a digital marketer on our paid media team. So you can come from all sorts of different backgrounds into your field. And I think the best thing is when I look at a resume, if they don't have that marketing experience or they don't have a marketing background per se, coming in with certifications or coming in with examples of work that you've done. Maybe you did a small side gig and you ran someone's social media account for a summer. Like, share that. You might have taken a marketing class as an elective. Share that information with your recruiter and list that so that you can show those kinds of things. I think will really help you stand out if you don't have a traditional marketing background. And then, list the things, because I think at the core of it, we're all marketers, right? We market ourselves for jobs. We market ourselves in the community and our networks. And so you are a marketer. And so tell your story, I think, like we've said, through your resume. Share areas that you've potentially marketed yourself, or, where you've partnered with a marketing team. Share your story of how you got involved or interested into the marketing space, I think is really important. And that's where like a cover letter will come into effect. I'll say I've definitely taken resumes before or candidate backgrounds that didn't have the exact degree requirement that I was looking for or field of study, but they had a strong cover letter stating why they wanted to get into that field, why they wanted to be a marketer, for example, and what their passion is for getting into that field. And that just sold me on them right away, and it earned them an interview. So.
Yeah, thank you. How about you, Anna? Is there anything on a resume from somebody that doesn't take the traditional marketing path that would help them stand out in your eyes?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, the resume is one thing, right? You've got like what is just on a paper, and like what Eric said with the cover letter, that can tell more of a story versus just what you have written down from, your academics and from any career paths that you've taken. That also, though, when you're applying to a job and you get to that next stage and you have the chance to talk to somebody, make sure you're taking what you've done in your relative and relevant experience and tying it specifically to what they're looking for. So, look at those qualifications, look at the preferred, look at the required, look at the job description, and think of those keywords that you're going to use during your interview to make sure that you're indicating that you've done your research and that you can showcase why you have the skills necessary to be successful. And even if there's some of them that you don't have, talking through what you could potentially do to get there, and also understanding that a lot of times with roles, there's the required and then there's the preferred, and a lot of the preferred is coachable. So really asking questions about, is this something that I can learn on the job? Is that a 3-month, a 3 to 6 month, how long would that be? What could I do to get ahead now with that type of skill set if it's not something that I directly have as well? And then also, when you're having those conversations, do your research beforehand around who you're interviewing with, like understand where they're coming from and how they got there so you can relate to their history a little bit as well. So, the preparation, I think, Eric and Virginia both mentioned the internet on the last question, and it's right there in front of you. It's the best tool you have. It's really going to give you the ability to see different types of resumes, where people are working, what is the company that you're applying for, and why is this skill so needed within that company. So preparation, I mentioned passion before, but preparation is probably one of the next biggest keys to being successful in the interview. If you don't have, especially like that exact degree, being able to understand and talk to that is going to be huge for you.
Yeah, I think the preparation part is key. The one pet peeve that I have in interviews is getting the sense that a candidate might only be there because it's just a job and any company would do. They just want a job. And even if it's not your dream job, I want to hear that there is that passion, right? That interest in that particular role in that particular company. I don't want to get the sense that it's a stepping stone, but I also know that's the reality for a lot of people, but you don't have to telegraph that in an interview. So that's all good points. I want to move into the interview questions because this is obviously the resume tips, the cover letter that helps you land the interview, right? That's the objective. And then once you're there, then it's a whole new ballgame, right? The real you has to shine through. So I'll start with Virginia because I know this is your area of expertise. The first and most obvious question these days is a lot of interviews are now done virtually versus in person. Are you advising different skills or ways to practice or prepare for virtual interviews versus in person? And how do you go about those conversations?
I think that's a really good question. So the core of it is still the same, but for example, being online is a little bit different. And so I tell people a lot about lighting. I've done, search committees where, you need to have a backlight, you need to have a front light. If you go on Amazon, if you just type in ring light or anything that has to do with like computer light, all these things pop up, you guys, that are literally like $15 or something like that. And it's worth it to have a camera. I guarantee you, if not, I know Andrew and Anna and Eric and I have our cameras on. It's not just that little thing that's on your laptop. The other thing besides lighting is how you're dressed. So I'm a big proponent of being dressed head to toe, and not just because, you can see the top of me. And so people are like, that's okay. I'm just going to wear my shirt and tie. And I'm telling you, it's during an interview when you have to get up or your roommate walks by. Oh, be careful about that tug. Your roommate walks by with her towel on or something like that. That happens. So I always tell people to get dressed, not to wear big jewelry because that can be distracting, especially in the light. I do that anyway when you're doing a face-to-face interview, but you don't want someone to be paying attention to your big hoop earrings. And also to dress I was learning about this in a session, to dress in not bright colors like pink or red, but maybe like a blue or an off-white, because I think that comes across better on the camera. You want people to look at your face. You don't want them to be distracted by a poster on the wall that may suggest something that, your recruiter's like, oh, maybe I don't really want to know about that. You need to be thinking about the lighting, where you're sitting, and also too, just making sure that if you have to, use your phone for the interview, and I get that because sometimes you're in between class or you're in a car, just try to make sure it's in as quiet of a place as possible. I am sure that our recruiters have stories about people like, well, I'm driving while you're interviewing me, and that just makes me so nervous. Or, they'll say like, oh, I'm sitting in traffic, and I'm going, did you not know that the interview was scheduled 2 days ago? You should have at least had the opportunity to pull over on the side of the road and be prepared, have your notes in front of you. And people on this call who are responsible enough to come and talk with us, I think they say like, oh, well, of course I wouldn't do that. But there is always somebody who does that. And we have lots of stories about how people are not preparing. And then other than just that, all of us have been talking about research on the company. The company is right there. Go on to their mission statement, look at their values. Does it match up with what you like? Because they're not just going to ask you, why are you interested in our company? They will know if you did not do your research. I mean, if you have an interview with CarMax, then start looking at their articles, Google stuff, see what's on their PR page. What are they proud of? Look at all of that information when you're doing your research. So that way, when you go in there and they ask you like, well, what do you know about this? There's so much more of a difference between saying, well, like, I know you're in Richmond and that you sell cars, which sounds really lame, but then you can say like, well, yesterday when I was on the Richmond Dispatch, I was learning that you did this acquisition and I was paying attention to X. And so if you see the difference in just doing that 20 or 30 minutes of research, plus, I think the other thing is that you're interviewing the recruiter as much as they're interviewing you. You have power too, and I don't think students realize that. There are red flags out there where you might be like, I don't know if they really know what's going on. A good recruiter is going to follow up with you right away. They're going to have your schedule ready to go. They're going to be willing to answer questions. It makes me nervous when I hear a student say like, well, they told me they were going to call me, but they didn't give me a phone number yet, or I don't know where the Zoom link is. So there's all kinds of things that I know that I can talk about, but I think the most important thing is being conscientious, being prepared for your interview. Please be on time. There are just so many simple things that I can tell you where people are like, well, of course I would do that, but you would be surprised about how unprepared that people are. And just doing some of these things already pushes you to the top, whether you realize it or not.
Yeah, those are all valid points. I think back to the mobile phone interviewing, if you do have to do it on a phone, find a steady place to hold it up. That's another very distracting thing I've seen when it's just not even somebody walking or driving, but they're just holding it on the desk. But okay, so from the recruiting standpoint, then Eric, how do you adjust the interview process for virtual versus in person? Because at Workshop, we do both. We prefer for local candidates to meet in person. It's always something additional to the face-to-face, but the world we live in now, it's not always available or possible. So what tips do you have from a recruiting standpoint to make that a successful interview?
Yeah, I think we've learned over time, like preparing for your interviews obviously is going to be a common theme. I think all of us will say, but doing your research, not just on the company, but if your first step in is with a recruiter, do your research on the recruiter. I love it when a candidate says, hey, I saw you worked at Amazon. Like what was it like working there? Or, what was it like working for Sprint? And, can you tell me about that? Like, I love those kinds of things. Those are just buzzword questions for me. I think the other really important thing is when you're virtually interviewing, as a recruiter, I sometimes share the LinkedIn profiles of the interviewers that they're with. And so I make sure that they are aware of who they're interviewing with so that the candidates can go and do their research on like the team that they're interviewing with. And I think that's super key to go, because if I can prevent you going in and being like, well, I don't have any questions at the end. I want to avoid that, and always be prepared with a question, whether it's a virtual or an in-person. Like, have 3 or 4 questions that you're going to ask the interviewers of what, what's on your mind. Because when I say, hey, I'm going to save 15 minutes at the end of our conversation for you to ask me any questions, I want that 15 minutes filled up with every question you have, because that's your portion to interview your recruiter, interview the company, and really find out if, at the end of the day, if this job is the right fit for you. Because interviews are two-way conversations. They're not just one way. And I think sometimes students forget that we have to make sure that you're interviewing each other, and don't be afraid to ask those questions. Ask those big, bold questions. What do you want to know? Like, what's the scariest thing about this job? Like, ask those, because a recruiter will tell you. A hiring manager might give you a nice sugar-coated sweet answer, but a recruiter might tell you, like, hey, it's tough. Like, it's a lot of work. You're going to do a lot, but here's how rewarding it is. Here's what you're going to get out of it. And so I think that's really important for preparing for those interviews.
Yeah, thank you. Anna, can I ask you, because I remember being in college and in interview situations, and like the big heavy question that Eric was alluding to, like salary. How do you even go about asking about salary? Because I want to make sure for the folks on the call, like, you guys showed up, like, you should get the inside scoop. What are the right ways and wrong ways to ask about the maybe arguably the most important question for some people?
Right.
But what are the tips you have there? Maybe questions to avoid in that arena too.
Yeah. So, let's just put it out there. Compensation is tricky, right? So you can ask a lot of questions about, what do the benefits package look like? When do things kick in? Is this a role that has, stock options, or is this something where I can expect to receive a bonus? My recruiters aren't going to tell you what your base salary is going to be if you get a job offer. They're not. They're going to wait until you actually get a job offer. What they can tell you is if they feel is it competitive? And you might say, is it competitive, for the Richmond market in competition with X, Y, and Z? Is it nationally competitive? And you can be very clear about that, and even really dig in. I mean, there's lots of information out there on the internet around compensation for particular roles coming out of college, and coming in with even more experience as well. So you need to know what you want too, and what's expected, but also what's reasonable coming in. And then also, this is something I think that, as you go along your professional career, you appreciate a little bit more, but really understand the benefits package that you're looking at a company. Like, understand what that means from a healthcare perspective, if there is a bonus perspective, if there are stock options, when did they vest? How long, before I get them, what's the 401k look like? Time away, all of those things are going to matter so much, and they're going to play into your total comp package. So you might be getting that offer from a company for, $100,000, and you might be getting one for $90,000, but they can still be apples to apples at the end of the day when you look at the total comp, and when you also look at everything else that's included. Like, I can tell you, CarMax, for our more exempt level positions, we have an unlimited time away package. So you can't take off, 10 weeks a year, but it's very flexible, and that provides you with a little bit more peace of mind, as opposed to keeping up with, I have 3 weeks of vacation, I need to track that, to the T, for my benefit and for, my work-life balance. So those are some things to really think about when you're going in with that compensation. So I would just go in with more of asking if it's competitive to market, understanding also it's different now, right? Because we're making offers to people who might be working remotely. So they might be working in, Richmond, but they might be working for a company that's, in New York. So the compensation is going to look different around, cost of living. So cost of living plays into everything too. So think about that. I always like to sell Richmond as an awesome cost of living for folks as well. But, think about, if you want to go to DC, do I have a car? Do I take the metro? Like, all of those different things play into your compensation. They do. So there are lots of factors to consider. I always like to say, I think a lot of our candidates who have offers right now are going home, and they're going to really talk to their parents or talk to someone that they feel like they can lay out these packages for, and can really read into them a little bit more than they feel like they can. And that's just important. Take your time with it. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is it's okay to ask the questions in a diplomatic way, but you may not get a clear answer during the upfront interview process. But all those are good. All those are good points of comparison too. And Virginia, you chatted a couple of other places students can go online to do some salary research. What other tips do you have there for helping piece together kind of that full compensation package, or what other advice do you provide to your students?
So I always tell our students, please don't ask about salary in the first round of interviews, because a lot of students do that. Like they'll just ask like, hey, how much am I going to make? Which is a clear indicator to the recruiter that you are probably more interested in the money than in the job. So even if you don't mean to do that, I always tell them, you really need to talk about yourself and get them to like you. This is part of a conversation. And so when they are making that offer, I think it's important to know that, this is a two-way street. They want to make sure that you're dedicated and that you really want that job. So asking about money right off the bat is not going to look well in your eyes. I think the other thing to be thinking about when you're looking at salaries, I think Anna makes a really good point. People don't look at the complete package of what would be offered. Time off, getting paid for that. I was just in a presentation with CoStar, and they were saying that there is no fee for some of the packages that they have for medical benefits. That's huge. The fact that you may not have to pay a copay for certain packages, it doesn't seem like a lot, but retirement. But unless a recruiter says that the salary is firm, I always ask, because as long as you ask for something reasonable. So when you do your research, one, you never want to put out a real number out there, because it's like negotiating for a car, right? You're trapped. If you say, oh, well, I'll take 45, and they were willing to go up to 50, then why would they give you 50? Because you already tipped your hand. So, I think it's always going for ranges when you're saying like, oh, well, they might ask you that, like, well, what are your salary expectations? Which is always a very difficult conversation to have. And you can always say, well, based on the research that I've done, I am looking at X. So you might say in the 50s or in the 60s. So you're giving enough for the recruiter to know you've done your research, but you're not giving them a number, because that number, in my opinion, when I'm a career counselor, is a no-no, because now they've got you where they want you. And they can also tell if you haven't done your research, if you ask for something astronomical. If you're asking for 80, maybe that could work for an engineer or supply chain, but not for marketing. So when you understand what the rules of are and the research that we keep talking about, that just gives you a little bit more idea of what you need to do. And so I'll speak from my perspective in higher education. I have always negotiated, whether it's higher education or within the private sector, a salary, and I've always gotten more because I've asked, and I've asked in a respectful way. And if they tell me that the salary is firm, then you need to make sure that that's what they're telling you. There is no playing around at that point. They might tell you like, this is what it is, but I wanted you to take a look at this. I do think that when a recruiter wants you, they're going to be honest with you as well. So I also tell people to be careful when you're having that salary negotiation, because at the end of the day, they still want to know that you're going to be committed to their organization and to them.
Yeah, thank you. All good points, right? And it's interesting to have both perspectives too, because every company does it differently, and there is no uniform process that I've seen. So it's very much a dance. Early on, we talked about, part of the interview process is selling yourself. I'd love to know, maybe from each of you, a couple of points, because I want to talk about how to create memorable stories, or how to tell your story in a memorable, meaningful way to connect to the recruiter and differentiate yourself. And then I want to transition us into maybe what to expect. Let's say you've landed the job, the first 60, 90 days on the job. Talk about some onboarding, because that's another blind spot, I think, for a lot of people early in their career. And I want to make sure we have time to get to that as well. So do you have give a few examples, or what to do, what not to do in terms of translating your experience into a memorable story to accompany your resume, cover letter, interview, or at any stage in the process. And I'll start with Eric. I think I'm coming back to you in a while, and then we'll go to Anna.
Yeah, sure. Virginia, I just put it in the chat, but the STAR method is honestly the best thing. When I go into an interview, I keep a running notes on my phone of like things that I've accomplished, and you know, I use those as my examples for interview questions, right? So I run through and type out, you know, what have I done? What was I asked to do? What did I do, and what were those results? And I'm able to have that in front of me. Most of the time I print it out. You know, in this nice world of virtual interviewing, we've been able to print those out. So take advantage of that and have that piece of paper in front of you. But also don't be afraid to bring something with you to an in-person interview, you know, a notepad and things like that that might have a few notes for you. I know that is just another sign of being prepared. But having those examples ready for you, because when you take a moment and sit there and are like, well, I don't really know. I can't think of a time when I did that. I don't remember. Like, stumbling through that is really tough for a recruiter, and we're going to try and help coach you to get an answer out of you because we need one. But we really want you to have a prepared answer and something that you're able to give to us off the bat, where you can share, you know, how, you know, a time when you dealt with a difficult situation and you were able to resolve a solution, and like for you to be able to just list that off and start diving into that story, and using descriptive words, using examples. You know, there might be times when you can't say a company's name, or you might not want to mention someone else's name specifically, but, you know, using those words to go around, you know, they or them, or how they operated within that. So providing really descriptive responses to questions like that is a great way to do that.
I like the idea of keeping a brag file on your phone. It's a nice way of doing it. How about you, Anna? What do you see successful candidates doing there?
Yeah, and just to go back to that brag file real quick, even with my associates today, when they've done something, I'll tell them, I'll be like, that is a future behavioral interview example. Like, keep up with behavioral interview examples. The STAR method is everybody is doing behavioral-based interviewing. They're going to ask you about situations, actions, results. And the hard part, especially coming out of college, is you've done a lot in groups, right? So it's easy to talk about we, but you've got to talk about what you did in the particular situation. It's okay to draw in your other teammates and your other classmates, but you need to talk about what you did, because they're hiring you, not a team, from your classrooms. The other piece of that is, you know, be prepared to reference, hey, I'm going to talk about a classroom situation that was here, or I'm going to talk about my internship that was here. So start off your story by giving the details that help plant that seed and kind of give the recruiter the overall picture as to what you were doing, where you were, and what the situation was. I think that's just a huge part of it. And there are so many behavioral interview examples out there on the internet. So you can go and you can see lots of different types of questions that might get asked, because typically what the people are asking you questions about are related to competencies that are needed to be successful in that role. So there's a point for them asking those specific questions, and they're going to want to make sure that you have an example that is showing, you know, I hate to say it like this, but turn that frown upside down. Even if you had a terrible experience, you know, don't talk badly about anybody. Like, really try and keep it on the up and up. And then so that you're not coming across as someone as maybe as a red flag of, you know, partnership or teamwork or collaboration. Make sure you're just keeping that as a positive vibe throughout the entire interview. I'm not saying you have to, you know, act like you're a cheerleader throughout, but you definitely have to make sure that you're using the appropriate terms to describe a situation, even when it was a situation that might have been a little bit more difficult, or in there are definitely questions they're going to ask you about difficult situations. And then I hate to say it, but don't use any, you know, slang. That's not great. You know, there's lots of things that are coachable, but if you throw out anything really bad, like that's what's going to sit with the recruiter, and that's what they're going to remember. And they're not going to remember all the other awesome things that you did throughout the interview. So that's a big part of it for us too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Virginia, do you have resources or ways that you're counseling students on telling those stories and using the STAR method and providing that context?
I have so much I could tell you, but the STAR method is a good way to start. And I agree with both what Anna and Eric said. Is is to take something that, it doesn't mean that, you know, a good question is like, could you please tell us about a time that you failed and what you learned from it? And so you sit down and you start thinking about, and I tell students to write down STAR and then put, you know, S, and then put what your situation is, what you wanted to talk about. And STAR is what keeps you focused, because you want to talk about like the time that you failed, and then was it a class, or were you disappointed someone? And then it's really important, the two pieces that people forget is the action, what actually happened, right? And then the result of what happened. Because when you don't tell your recruiter what actually happened, well, one, you leave them hanging, because in the back of my head, I'm like, well, what happened? And then sometimes they're going to try and prompt you about it. But so a good example about the fail piece is we were interviewing, or I was helping to coach someone, and she failed a class and she had a 4.0, and it was really upsetting to her. And I asked her, I'm like, well, what happened about that? And she said, well, I learned that I didn't have to get all A's. I learned that it wasn't, you know, she goes, I went in with a better perspective. And that's what they want to hear, is they want to know what situations you've overcome. And so I think when you look at the STAR method, it's very helpful. The other thing that I'm always telling people is that they have your resume in front of them. So don't keep using the same organization, right? Because then they sit there and they're like, oh my gosh, all of your experiences are from Chick-fil-A. They're not. It's also from the class that you've had or another job. So it's important to vary it up. So maybe if they ask you a question about a time that you failed, and then they ask you a question about where you had to deal with it, or help a person, or where you had a challenging time, then you go to another experience. And so I always tell people to have notes on each of, honestly, headings of each of the companies or places that you've worked, and underneath them have something. For example, if you're going to talk about a challenging time, what it does, the act of thinking about it, will help you to easily pivot. If they ask you another question, you're like, oh, well, I was already thinking about Chick-fil-A. Now I've just had my internship over at X. So I can go and pull from that information. So I think those two things with the STAR method and varying it up. And then also too, if you don't have something that's exactly what they're asking for, you just don't know it. Instead of, you know, they're like, could you please tell us a time, for example, with maybe they're asking you about a certification and you don't have it, right? But then you can always talk about, you know, what you have been doing and what you're going to do in order to, what you've learned about it, how you're excited about learning more from the company. You know, they will give you the training that you need. Really what they're trying to look at, and people don't realize it, is the person. The recruiter's always looking at, like, can I train this person? You can have the best grades in the world, you guys, but if you have no personality, and they're always going to be looking at, can I put this person in front of a client? Will this person be someone that I know could represent our organization very well? So you can have the best grades, and I'm not saying that GPA isn't important, but if you go up to a manager and you say, I had a 4.0 at William & Mary, you know what they're going to say to you? I don't care. They're going to say, I need you to do your work. So it's really important that when you're looking at all of these things for an interview, to pay attention to what you want them to know, and to not draw attention to the fact that you may not know something, but that you can learn it and that you can draw from another experience.
Yeah, I love that. And stories themselves are so powerful, right? We're hardwired to pay attention to stories as humans. So that carries forth into the business world. I mean, that's honestly how I remember that Eric had two encounters with Jeff Bezos and loves sloths. You know, that those are the kinds of things that stick out in my mind that I will always associate with those early conversations. And really are just, you know, unique. And everybody does have unique experiences and stories, even if they don't feel that unique to you, right? It's about the situations. I like that advice. So let's say all of this is successful and you've gotten the job, you've been hired, now you're moving on to the onboarding phase. And this, you know, this is somewhat outside the purview of recruiting, and I understand that. But some common questions we get are like, what does a training look like? What do the first few months look like? What is not so much a day in the life, because we're not all practicing digital marketers on a day-to-day basis, but how do you answer those questions about the training, the onboarding, what to expect in the first 30, 60, or 90 days, or how do you communicate that to your new hires? And Anna, I'll give you the first crack at this one.
Yeah. So I think I'll start with like interns. And so if you think about interns, we're kind of wooing along the way, right? So you're going to see leaders, you're going to, hear from them, you're going to have training, but you're also going to do a functional job so that we can tell at the end of an internship if we should make you an offer to return as a full-time associate. When you enter us as the company as a full-time associate, it's a little bit different, right? Because you are typically joining into a team. What we do, though, at CarMax for the first 6 weeks is we actually, for specific programs, will put you as a cohort together so that you are actually going through training together, and you're honestly, you're making a bond with other employees, and you've got people that you feel like you can lean on outside of your managers and your teammates once you join the actual team. A big part of that first 30 days is getting to know the company, right? Like, what are the ins and outs? What are the kooky acronyms that we have? What are the ways that you reserve desk space or reserve a room? It's like semantics a little bit, but you're also getting embedded into this team, into this role. So you're starting to understand a little bit more about, what are the projects your team is working on? Maybe you're not heavily involved in them, but you're starting to understand what those projects look like and how you will be involved in them in the future. And that leads into probably the 30 to 60 days where you'll start to do a little bit more work on specific projects or teamwork, but typically partnered with somebody. You're going to have a buddy, you're going to have a mentor, but you're also going to start into some more training that might be specific to the role that you're in. It might be some Python, Tableau, whatever it might be, but that's going to start in the 30 to 60 days. And the 60 to 90 days, you're going to be doing a little bit more on your own. So you're going to be stepping out of just, specifically having more scheduled meetings with other individuals to do project work and group work, and really doing your own work and leading that work and starting to know who you need to pull in from various areas to help you get your job done. But you're still in this point where throughout the 30 to 60 to 90 days, you're having meet and greets. You're meeting people across the teams because you're going to need to build your network across the company. And that's going to really take probably, a year. For that first year is really kind of understanding who I go to. They know me. I know what I need to do to make sure that they have everything that they need. So, those first 90 days, they're not going to be all fluff. There's going to be a lot of training. There's going to be a lot of one-on-one, but there's also going to be, you're going to start to be held accountable for some actions and for some results, even if the results are going to be in the future and not within that first 90 days.
Yeah, thank you. Eric, how do you answer that question? What does the first 60-ish, 90 days look like?
Yeah, I think, I'm actually, oddly enough, still in my first 90 days with Workshop. I just got here in August, so I'm still learning, the Workshop way and about the company. But, what's great is every company has training programs. Every company has resources, whether it's videos or documents or an internal wiki page. And my background wasn't in the marketing recruiting world, so I didn't have that experience. And I used our internal wiki, and I used the resources, and I asked teams to join, their calls. Hey, can I just shadow you? Can I listen in? I think that's really important, and something that will make you successful in your career is being willing to just be a fly on the wall if you can in your first 30, 60, 90 days, because companies are going to set you up for that. Like they want you to reach out to people. They want you to reach out to your team and other teams and really build your network. Don't be afraid to get time with your boss's boss, like within your first 90 days, like throw some time on their calendar, reach out, if they have an admin, reach out and be like, hey, I just started. I'd really love to get time on your calendar, on this is my director's calendar in the next 90 days or so. Do that, because that one is just going to set yourself up for success. And then in terms of training, like you need to start building your success plan as well. Like the company is going to outline a success plan for you, but you should have your own too, and how you'll be successful in the role in what they want for you, and start to build your development plan is going to be. Start to find how you want to develop with the company, because they're going to have you on an IDP or a development plan for you. After your first 90 days, you're going to start to develop that and get that written out with your manager. And so start to build that so that when you go into that meeting with your manager at the end of your 90 days, you're like, hey, here's the path that I want. Here's how I'm going to do it. Here's how I'm going to be successful. And just set yourself up for success based on all the training and all the information that you've pulled in.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely differences between small, medium, and large companies too, right? Sometimes those paths are more defined, and sometimes they're more almost choose your own adventure. And
they are.
That is another important piece. Maybe that goes back to that interviewing process and thinking about the roles and opportunities you want to apply for in the first place, because some people are more at home in large companies where there's predictability and stability and lots of resources and advantages. And other people love the small business vibe where you have more opportunities to get your hands dirty in different things, and maybe the lanes aren't as clearly defined. And each of those has pros and cons for sure. And I've lived them both, as have probably all of us. So yeah, I agree. There's a fit for everybody, and it is a bit like choose your own adventure at some point. But you got to take ownership of your own career, I think, is probably the underlying theme. I want to wrap up. I want to make sure we get out of here on time. I want to give each of you an opportunity to plug whatever it is you need. Right? We've got students. We've got whether you have specific skills you're looking for, positions you've got, conversations you want to have. Virginia, I'll go with you, and I'm going to drop your LinkedIn links into the chat as well, so people can connect with you elsewhere online if that's okay. So the conversation can certainly continue from here. And then I'll wrap up at the very end. I've got a survey link I want to send out just to see from y'all what you want to hear more about, because we can create more topics, more conversations around this. And we're planning our programs for 2022. So I would love to keep the conversation going. So while you're going, I'll go Virginia, then Eric, then Anna. Feel free to plug whatever you like or ask, whatever question you want.
Okay, so you know what I'm going to plug, which is the Career Center. Whichever university that you go to, please go visit your Career Center. I think one of the things that people don't realize is that it's part of your tuition, right? So take advantage of your resources, because I didn't. And it's one of the reasons why I actually am a career coach, is because I went to my Career Center in March of my senior year, and I had no idea what I was doing. And so I told myself I did not want anyone else to be in that position. I think the other thing, and I was just looking at this when I've worked with marketing students as an academic advisor, is if you go on American Marketing Association and sign up for My MAA Daily, you can go and they send you an article every single day about the marketing field. It might be about integrated marketing. It might be about B2B, business to business, or B2C, business to consumer. So it's not always going to be about digital marketing, you guys, but you need to understand the whole space of it, because you're always working in a global space. So even though you might want to do digital marketing, you may need to be, and you do need to be a person that can not only pivot, but can adjust if you're looking at a certain campaign, or if you're looking on something in social media. So I do like My AMA Daily. Please go to your Career Center. Also too, if you happen to be a VCU business student, lucky you, because you can come and see me. They also do mock interviews. I do mock interviews with people. I also do them with my friends who are going up into upper level executive and management positions. It's always good to practice your interviewing skills, because what you think you're going to say in your head does not always come out of your mouth the way that you thought it would. And so being able to practice, I'm in this new position as an associate director, and I had one of my colleagues, she and I went over interview questions together, and that was just in September. So as a professional, as a young professional, as an up and coming professional, we're always working on our skills. And so I think that's important for you guys to know, and what I would want to leave you with.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome advice. Eric.
Yeah, I'll say, I'll plug obviously the job openings that we have at Workshop. You know, we don't have, we're about to post our entry-level openings. So for those graduating, be on the lookout for those on our careers page and share them. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to share those with you as well. I'll say, don't be afraid to reach out to recruiters. I have been applying to Amazon for about 5 years, and I connected with a recruiter on LinkedIn and said, hey, you might not have something for me, but if you do, I'd love to get 5 minutes with you and chat. You know, some of us probably have hundreds of messages and connections, but those are the ones that stick out to me as a recruiter. The ones that just say, hey, you know, interact with us. I really liked your post on this. I really like that. This job opportunity looks cool. I'd love to apply for it or talk to you about it. Those kind of things are really great. And don't be afraid to connect with, you know, the co-founders of companies or the CEOs of companies on LinkedIn too. Like, that's a way to really get your name out and be recognized, because, you know, Andrew's going to come to me and say, hey, you know, John Doe reached out to me on LinkedIn. You should interview him. And that's the first thing I'm going to do. I'm going to interview him.
Yeah, I love keeping in touch with a lot of people as y'all do, and just seeing the cool, interesting things people are working on. So social networks do matter. Anna, I'll give you the closing word. What are you looking for, and how can we help you?
Yeah, well, first of all, we're hiring. So just so you guys know, our roles are out there. We're hiring like mad right now. It's an amazing time to work in our industry. I'll also just plug what Virginia said. If you are in school, career services is free. It is one of the best resources you can go to. Utilize them, utilize their websites, understand where, you know, employers are posting the roles for your school. Is it Handshake? Is it Simplicity? Is it a homegrown system for that school? Understand that system and understand that is where the roles are going to be. So you can go in there, you can look at the roles that they have up there. But if you also are looking for a particular city or a particular company, go to that website for that company. The roles are going to be there for you guys, and that you should go ahead and apply there. The next piece I would say is, you know, specifically for CarMax, think of us as, you know, a large corporation, right? Last, 16 years, one of the best Fortune 100 best companies to work for. Look at the accolades of the companies you're looking for. Look at the size. Are you looking for a large company? Are you looking for a mid-sized company? And if you are in school, you will get a variety of different advice in this category. During your fall semester, apply for full-time roles if you're graduating in the spring, and apply for internships. You do not need to wait to the spring. There's no reason to wait to the spring. Apply in the fall. There are a lot of companies where their programs get filled. And so they're going to fill them, and they're going to start, really posting roles at your schools and on our company websites in August. And they're going to keep going until those positions are filled. Last year for us in our analyst community, that was the fall semester. This year, we're definitely going to be hiring into the spring, but it's not April, it's not May. You guys need to really get on it and start thinking about where you want to be and applying for roles. And I just have to say this as someone who's been in the recruiting space before. Don't apply for a role. Don't go into your career services site and just click. Think about what you're doing, because you don't want to be blindsided when somebody reaches out to you and you not remember that you applied for that role and you're not sure what it is. You just look disorganized, and it's really just not something that's probably going to further you in the interview process. So be thoughtful. Remember, take notes, write down what you're applying for. Resource, like if any of our leaders in our company reach out and say, hey, Anna, this is a candidate that I know is interested in one of our roles, I'm going to make sure that we get in touch with them. Employer referrals are golden for companies, and we want to make sure all of those referrals have some type of reach out. So network, that is very acceptable. It's acceptable to reach out to people on LinkedIn, ask them what they like about the company. There's just so much you can be doing, but do it sooner rather than later. And even if you're going abroad, you can do a lot of things virtually these days. So just make sure you're taking the time to really consider what it is you want to do and keeping up with what it is that you're applying for as well.